All together. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Happy birthday to you.
Is that all? Why, how about once more? Come on.
America's America when a humble farm boy can find himself for a period of almost 8 years living in the White House and in the Blair House in the national capital, and indeed is the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States. The greatest citizen that has ever been produced by this sovereign state of Missouri, a man who today is loved and respected not only by those of us who know him and know him intimately and know him well, but he is loved and respected across this nation and in faraway places. And one of the things that, in my opinion, makes him great is the fact that those who are leaders behind the bamboo curtain and the Iron Curtain detest him and hate him, which in my judgment makes him even a taller and a greater man. No one had to ever ask twice where President Truman stood on anything. He was willing to stand up and be counted for that which he believed was for the best interest of his fellow man, and indeed for the best interest of the great nation over which he ably presided. It's my humble judgment that if men, no matter where they may hail from, if they'll talk long enough about a problem, ultimately it can be resolved. It's when men cannot talk that they do not resolve their differences. The United Nations has played a very vital and an important role in the well-being of the world as it is now constituted. The United Nations, I pray, will ever live, and it will be a great memorial to the man who will ever be remembered. With his wisdom, a Truman Library was erected in the county seat of the county of Jackson. That memorial library is not only magnificent, not only beautifully appointed, but he set a new pattern insofar as men who have served as the chief executive of our republic in maintaining letters of importance and handing down to posterity those documents that record history in a better and a finer fashion.
For which we stand over in Southeast Asia, and I don't think you need to worry about the result. I think they finally awakened to the fact that they're going to win the war. They've got to go ahead and win it. And I'm firm to do it.
For every one of you in thanking President Truman and General Eisenhower for making this possible. For Mr. Stavropoulos for not only the represent.
Always very, very thrilled to be here with President Truman. I appreciate and I am, as I said before, so proud of the friendship that has existed between President Truman and myself for many, many years. And I hope it will continue for many, many years to come. And I'm sure I would do as well as Dewey did in Chicago. And for some illegal reason, I cannot run for president. I'll take a lesson from Alabama and have my wife run. You all know my wife, Mary Bird, I believe.
Of this one thing I am sure. The door of peace must be kept wide open for all who wish to avoid the scourge of war. But the door of aggression must be closed and bolted if man himself is to survive. on the day that others decide to substitute reason for terror, when they will use the pen instead of the hand grenade, when they will replace rational logic for inflammatory invective, then on that very day the journey toward peace can really begin. We want a peace with honor and with justice that will endure. We will work with those who are willing to work with us for their own progress in the spirit of peace and in the spirit of understanding. And while we work for peaceful progress, we will maintain our strength against aggression. Now let me leave this one last thought with you. I think every schoolboy knows that peace is not unilateral. It takes more than one to sign an agreement. And it seems clear to all that what is holding up peace in the world today is not the United States of America. What is holding back the peace is the mistaken view on the part of the aggressors that we are going to give up our principles, that we may yield to pressure or abandon our allies or finally get tired and get out.
Our mission is specific. We propose to honor one of the great men of peace of our generation, and we intend to establish in his name a center where peace can always abide, even in our presently troubled world. A center where the preoccupation of those who use it will be with the universal peace which is espoused by every major religion of the world, but which has never yet been achieved. The man of peace whom we honor is Harry S. Truman, 33rd President of the United States.
Well, that's rather a peculiar thing. First, you must realize that for almost 8 years, the man couldn't spend a dime for anything, nothing. He couldn't go shopping. He couldn't buy anything. He didn't have occasion for money. Everything was taken care of by his staff. He didn't pay a check of any kind. For nearly 8 years, that's really something. And then all of a sudden, that ends, and he's on his own. When he came home, and as you recall, his office was in the Federal Reserve Bank, down at 10th and Grand, he would say to me, well, I want you to come and have lunch with me because I don't know my way around. And the first time I went down, I parked my car and we went up to his office and we walked over to the Pickwick Hotel, which was around the corner, and we had lunch. And I picked up the check and he said, no, I haven't paid a check for so long, I want to pay it. So he picked up this check and reached down in his pocket and pulled out a little purse, a little pocketbook, not that thick, and in it was his change. And he took out a dime and a nickel and laid it on the table, and he said, how much should I tip? And I looked at the bill. I think the bill was $2.95, and I said, oh, you've got plenty of money, give him 50 cents. And he looked at me kind of funny and picked the money up and laid down 2 quarters. Now, that seems funny, but that's, if a person just hasn't paid a bill of any kind or a check of any kind for 8 years, it's a peculiar spot to be in. And then I suggested that we go over to the Kansas City Club. And he said, well, I don't know why I should go over to the Kansas City Club. I never had many supporters over there. I don't think many people like me. And I said, well, you might be surprised. And I belong to a little luncheon club, one of the oldest inner clubs in the Kansas City Club, called the 822 Club. And he was an honorary member of that and made so when he became president. And I said, well, the boys at 822 would like to see you. And so we went over, and he thoroughly enjoyed it. And everyone there was his friend, and he enjoyed that more than anything. And I think all the time that his office, before he moved, for the library was complete in Independence, I think we had lunch at the 822 Club 90% of the time. And he thoroughly enjoyed it, and that's where he learned the transition over to becoming a private citizen. President Truman felt very definitely that all presidential papers should be saved and taken care of. And as he has said in many of his talks, many of our former presidents didn't do that, and the papers are lost to the historians of the world and the people of America. And there is no provision to take care of presidential papers, and of course Mr. Roosevelt had his library, and so he wanted his. And incidentally, he wanted very much to put that library on the old Truman Farm out in Grandview, and he wanted to devote several acres to that. Some members of his family objected to him giving that ground to the organization because, after all, there wasn't a pension at that time, and he was still a poor man, and they didn't feel that he should give up that ground. The powers that be at the then University of Kansas City, some of them talked to me and said they would be delighted to give the beautiful space for the library out on the campus, which is now the University of Missouri at Kansas City. And I took him out one day after lunch, and we drove down Rock Hill Road, and right up ahead on Rock Hill Road was a beautiful, beautiful hill site where they had selected for his library. And I, of course, being a Kansas City, Missouri boy, wanted that library in Kansas City, Missouri. I didn't want it in Grandview or Independence, and if I could get it there, I wanted to do it. And I thought it was a logical place, but he didn't seem a bit enthused, and I said, well, how come, boss, don't you like it? And he said, no, I don't like it. He said, you know where the library ought to be? And I said, no, where? And he said, Independence. And I said, well, you never said that to me before. And he said, no, because I don't see how we can do it. I took him back to the office. I immediately went out to Independence and saw the then Mayor Weatherford, told him of our story. And I want to tell you, it wasn't 2 weeks until the city council dedicated that ground where the library is now, known as Slover Park, and even went so far as to buy some lots and houses back of it. And I want to tell you that the president is delighted that that's where the library is. His only and main interest was in preserving the papers for future generations to look over and form their own opinion regarding his time as President of the United States. In fact, I'm sure you are familiar with the fact that he has set up what is known as the Harry S. Truman Library Institute, which is an organization that receives gifts and in every manner, shape, and form. And the money is used for grants and aid to students throughout the world to come here to study the office of the presidency, not necessarily Mr. Truman's But we have at the library not only all of his records, but microfilm of all other presidential records so that they can make a complete study of the office of the presidency.
Once the Truman Presidential Library became a functioning institution, what was his personal relationship to it as the proprietor, so to speak?
Well, as you know, when the library was complete and dedicated, and Chief Justice Warren was here and made the principal speech, former President Hoover was here and made a great speech, Mrs. Roosevelt was here. At that particular time, title to the ground and the library and all of his papers and everything was turned over to the United States government, except that part where his office and waiting room and his, as we call it, his own department. And that belongs to the government too, but nobody believes that, including Mr. Truman. As long as he's alive, that's going to be his. And after he passes away, then it becomes the property of the government. No, I don't think he had that, felt that responsibility, but, and still he did, because, as you well know, every president, since his term, be they Democrat or Republican, has conferred with him and asked his advice, and he felt that he actually did have a duty. But as he said, I can't make decisions because I don't have available to me the things that I had when I was president. And in fact, he has said no man is in a position to make a decision about our national security, dozens of things, unless he has all the facts that only the President of the United States has. But when he did have the feeling that, and I think he cherished it, that when our presidents that followed him asked his help and asked his advice.
That night, protocol called and said, asked me about the president, and that Mrs. General Eisenhower and Mrs. Eisenhower have inviting Mrs. Truman and President Truman to ride from the church to the cemetery. And I said, I can't give you the answer, I've been feeling very well, and he's in bed now resting, but I can tell you in the morning. So the next morning, I got up, and he was up at 5:30. He was reading the Bible as usual before the papers come. And I said, Mr. President, I want to bring you up to date as to what happened about protocol. And he said, right quick, he said, we'll do it. He said, I'm not here to snub anybody. And so arranged. And then after the funeral, Mrs. Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, Margaret, President Truman came to the Blair House. They left before lunch, and I had the lunch and everything all prepared, and refreshments and everything that went along with it. And we had one of the nicest meetings. President Eisenhower would say to President Truman, I remember when you sent me here, and he says, yes, you did a good job. Two ladies sat on the van, one president one side, one on the other, and then President Eisenhower picked his chair up, went out and sat by Truman, and they discussed a lot of things.